Spencer Rattler has been one of the most talked about quarterbacks over the last few years. He became a 5-star recruit, the #1 quarterback in the class of 2019, and was expected to win the Heisman Trophy and be a top-end NFL draft pick while at Oklahoma. After an interesting saga back and forth between him and Caleb Williams, he eventually decided to enter the portal and leave for a fresh start at South Carolina. He reunited with former Oklahoma coach Shane Beamer, and combining his hype with South Carolina's newfound success, many believe that both the Gamecocks and Rattler were headed for a huge 2022 season. So far, it has been a mixed bag of results. Spencer Rattler has not graded out very well compared to other SEC quarterbacks. South Carolina is not looking as good as expected. Some have already given up on the Spencer Rattler hype. In today's video, I thought I would start a new concept where I'm going to give Rattler a report card. We're to go through his career, talk about how things have gone at South Carolina so far, and then we're going to grade him in multiple areas and see what his overall grade is. But before we can talk about that, be sure to subscribe to the channel as we are on the road to 100K. Also, you're not going to miss out on any more college football videos, so be sure to hit that bell so you get alerted every time I upload. Leave a like if you want to support what I'm doing here, and let me know what player or topic I could do in my next video. Now, let's talk about Spencer Rattler. This is probably my 50th video on the channel where I've mentioned Rattler, but in case you haven't heard from me or anyone else, Rattler was a 5-star recruit coming out of Pinnacle High School in Arizona and chose to play for Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. He would arrive as the backup to Jalen Hurts in 2019, and while Hurts had a spectacular season, Rattler would study and get better and get more comfortable with the team as he would appear against Texas Tech and South Dakota and ultimately get a couple of snaps in the college football playoff against LSU. He finished with 81 yards and a touchdown. With Hurts off to the NFL, Rattler would take over in 2020. He beat out Tanner Mordecai for the starting job, and in his first game against Missouri State, he would throw for 4 touchdowns. He'd follow that up with 4 scores the following week, but this time some of his flaws started to show. He had 3 interceptions, and the team ultimately lost to Kansas State 38-35. This was unacceptable for Oklahoma to lose this game, and he followed up with a 2-touchdown, 1-interception performance and a 7-point loss on the road against Iowa State. Oklahoma was off to a 1-2 start, but Rattler would put the team on his back for the remainder of the year. He threw for 3 touchdowns in a win over number 22 Texas, 2 touchdowns in a road victory over TCU, 2 scores in a win against Texas Tech, 4 touchdowns in a win over number 14 Oklahoma State, and 2 touchdowns in a win over Baylor. This would lead Oklahoma to 6 straight victories, and Rattler would get his Sooners back to the Big 12 championship, where they would beat Iowa State in a rematch where he threw for 272 yards and had 2 combined touchdowns. Because of those 2 early season losses, the Sooners were left out of the college football playoff, but they would still get an opportunity to play in a big-time bowl game. They're matched up against number 7 Florida, and what some would thought would be a pretty good game ended up being extremely lopsided. Maybe it was because Florida was overrated, or maybe it was because their top 4 players opted out of the game. Either way, Rattler had nearly 300 all-purpose yards with 4 scores and a 55-20 dominating victory. On the season, Rattler threw for 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 7 picks, and also had 6 more scores on the ground. It was a terrific first year for Rattler, which is why expectations shot through the roof in 2021. Some expected him to be the #1 overall pick, Heisman contender, and lead Oklahoma to the national championship. Unfortunately, it would not go well for him. In their first game against Tulane, he had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, but they barely beat the Green Wave 40-35. This was a tough debut for him. In week 2, he threw 5 touchdowns in a victory over Western Carolina, before he had 2 touchdowns in a close victory over Nebraska. Things were starting to look a bit shaky for him as they expected his play to be a lot better, and the Boo Birds began during the West Virginia game. At halftime, the student section was chanting that they wanted Caleb Williams instead, but they would keep Rattler in that game, and they would barely win 16-13 and beat the Mountaineers by way of a game-winning field goal. Through the first 4 matchups, Rattler had okay stats, but he was not playing well in the bigger game. He'd once again start against Kansas State, where he'd throw for 2 touchdowns, but once again, they would barely beat the Wildcat. Things got to a breaking point in the Texas game, as after getting down early, they decided to put Caleb Williams in, and he led them on a miraculous comeback where they would win in overtime 55-48 by way of a miracle Marvin Mims touchdown and a Kennedy Brooks game-winning score. Caleb Williams officially took over as the starter, and Rattler would not get an opportunity to play again until the Baylor game, where he came in for a couple of series. Caleb Williams would start to put up big-time numbers and was definitely the future of Oklahoma. Rattler finished with 1,400 yards with 11 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. It was a disappointing season, so he decided to enter the transfer portal. Where would he go? Well, he would reunite with Shane Beamer and go to South Carolina. He brought his tight end, Austin Stogner, along with him, and all of a sudden everyone was talking about the Gamecocks, talking about how Rattler could save his career, and how he was going to develop into an NFL prospect. Everyone knew he'd have to fix his arm. Tim Tebow said, quote, "His greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. It's his arm ability. His ability to throw it with velocity and accuracy, he can get away with drifting, and he did that so much in high school. He even did that against lesser competition, but then against Texas and those bigger teams, he couldn't get away with it because now defenders could get their hands on the ball too. Also, if he continues to do this in the SEC, it's going to lead to turnovers. Say what you want about Tim Tebow, but that was his preseason comment. I was somewhere in the middle. I thought he's going to be your average starting quarterback and help with the resurgence of South Carolina football, and there was good reason because he had a lot of weapons. Guys like Jaheim Bell, Antoine Wells, Austin Stogner, Jalen Brooks, and Josh Vann were all back, and it seemed he was going to have plenty of players to throw the ball to. He'd also get an opportunity to finally succeed at his job, but there were 3 problems. 1, he would need to improve in a lot of mechanical areas and probably get over that mental barrier of what happened last season. Secondly, he was not going to get much help from his offensive line, as everyone knew South Carolina was going to struggle there. And thirdly, you'd have to do that with an extremely difficult schedule. So how has Rattler done this year? Well, it's not really been that great. In week 1 against Georgia State, he threw for 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, and that was not a great debut. In week 2 against Arkansas, he did throw for 377 yards, but he only had 1 touchdown and had an interception, and ultimately they got beat start to finish 44-30 by the Razorbacks. In week 3, he had his worst performance of the season, as he barely threw for over 100 yards without a touchdown and 2 interceptions, and a 48-7 humiliation by way of Georgia. At first, people were saying this is because Georgia was that good, but the last 2 weekends, Georgia struggled against both Kent State and Missouri, so all of a sudden, that's not looking like as good of an excuse as it once was. He would neither throw for a touchdown or a pick, and then against South Carolina State, he had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, with his first rushing touchdown on the ground. So overall, it's been pretty disappointing, but let's give him that report card. I'm going to grade Rattler in 4 areas: his stats, his wins, his draft stock, and the it factor. So what are his numbers? Well, he's thrown for 1,121 yards, 4 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, completed 64.9% of his passes, and has a QB rating of 126.7. He's number 6 in the SEC in passing yards, number 12 in touchdowns, number 13 in passer rating, has the most interceptions, and has the 8th best completion percentage. He's either below average or at the bottom in pretty much all of those categories. So for his stats, we're going to give him a C-. In terms of his wins and how he's elevated the team, he's beaten Georgia State, South Carolina State, and Charlotte, and lost both Georgia and Arkansas. Because he has 3 wins under his belt, we're going to give him a C- there as well. In terms of his draft stock, I give him a D. He may still get drafted based on his name and potential alone, but he has turned the ball over more, become less efficient, not played well against better defenses, has not capitalized on bad defenses, and he's lowered his stock against premier competition. Finally, for his it factor, he has made a couple of highlight plays and has at times showed major potential and confidence. But honestly, there hasn't been one of those big time games yet, and his performances have not popped off the page. For that, I'm going to give him a C. So my overall grade for Spencer Rattler this season is a C-. He really hasn't done anything particularly well, but he could have lost more games, his stats could be worse, or he could have even gotten benched. He's also not getting any help from his offensive line, so that is also a factor. I place half the blame on him and half the blame on the offensive line, but again, what the heck do I know? One other thing I would like to mention is that Beamer did not go out and get Rattler because he thought he'd be a Heisman winner. He brought him to Columbia because he thought he would give South Carolina a better chance to take the next step forward and at least compete against a daunting schedule. I think he's going to improve by the end of the season and come back again for a 5th year with a different approach and should improve a lot. In terms of their schedule, they still have Kentucky, Texas A&M, Missouri, Vanderbilt, Florida, Tennessee, and Clemson. And in my opinion, the Gamecocks will maybe win 2 of those. They'll probably win 2 out of 3 between A&M, Missouri, and Vanderbilt, or maybe they'll pull off an upset. Who knows though, but overall, I'm going to give Rattler a C- for the season, but I'm still a big fan of him, and he has plenty of time to improve. But what do you think? If you're a South Carolina fan, what is your grade of Spencer Rattler? What quarterback or player should I take a look at in my next video? And what are your expectations for the Gamecocks moving forward? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video. And check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon. But until next time, peace.